Welcome to the Friendly Jodies podcast, Shawarma FM. Today we have a very, very special episode. We've got Dr. Peter Slezak. You've been a professor of philosophy most of your life. You're, in my opinion, I invited Professor Slezak because I was absolutely impressed with him while I was at uni. And while I was thinking of who to invite for the guests, your name came up, and I just cold emailed you, and you were kind enough to respond and come on.
Thanks. It's a privilege. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you so
very
much.
It is not a privilege, but we are honored.
It's not a privilege, but thank you so much.
So you're speaking to a bunch of 20 to 30-year-olds.
Dropouts,
or all they think about is where the next gag is. It's all about jokes.
That's pretty serious.
They take very few things seriously.
No, that's
But I hope they take this one seriously because we can learn a lot from you.
So can I ask? So you were Ali's teacher?
No, he wasn't. He taught 1 hour lecture once
at UNSW.
At UNSW.
I was a guest lecturer in somebody else's
guest
course.
lecturer.
Right. And what was the course?
The course was history, but his talk was on Galileo, which is something else we'll get into, which is your atheism advocacy, and I have a few questions about that as well. But before we start, would you like to introduce yourself in your own words without me putting something that might not...
It depends on the context, but yeah, I've been a philosophy teacher for all my academic career. I did my graduate study in America, actually, which was important because it radicalized me in important ways. I studied
at Columbia, right?
Columbia University in New York.
No surprise you got it radicalized over there.
Well,
Trump has been telling us how bad that's
well, mind you, the administration in Columbia collapsed and buckled.
Capitulated, right?
Yeah, they capitulated, as did Harvard and others. So that's a sad story. But Columbia is one of the great universities, and the professors are great. So it was a real good luck for me to be among the greatest people in the world there. It was a bit of luck, and the professors and my co-students, they were just... I learned a lot, and it changed. It changed me very dramatically. New York is not even America, really. It's a different place.
What year was this when you were at Columbia?
Don't ask embarrassing questions.
I want to get the historical context of the time that you
arrived there exactly while the Watergate hearings were going on in 1972.
Wow.
And I was there till 1976.
Peak of Vietnam War. We know how you got radicalized.
The Vietnam War was still going on, and it ended while I was there.
In 75,
that famous shot of them getting on the helicopter at the top of a building, that was while I was there. I had a Polish friend in the building, and he was very upset that America got kicked out, but I was very pleased. So that was that period, yeah.
Can you give us it's interesting, actually, I'm glad you brought this up. Our generation, often we make parallels between the time that we're living in now with the late 60s and early 70s era. Is there a parallel there, or are we just looking into it too much?
Look, there are always some parallels. I mean, the significant thing at that time was the very large local dissent against the Vietnam War. That grew. It took a long time. Chomsky points out that it was slow getting going. Mm-hmm. And, of course, horrible tragedy in Vietnam and Cambodia before. In the end, domestic dissent stopped it. Mm-hmm. That's my understanding, that it became too costly at home, and they had to wind it down and get the hell out. So that was an important part of American life, and maybe there are some parallels. The dissent here against Gaza and the Israeli atrocities and genocide. There's some parallel there. It's difficult to make comparisons. There's not enough dissent. There's not enough activism generally on that side.
But what scares me is that if one is to believe that there are some parallels, then what followed that era was the deregulation of Reagan and Thatcherism. So are we headed towards a similar thing?
I don't know. I think so. I mean, it's hard to judge and predict, but I think the system has learnt lessons from the 60s and clamped down. Universities have changed. It's no longer a place where dissent is so open and easy. Students are not allowed to engage in their societies as freely as they did. So universities are important. As now, or recently, there was the encampments at the university, which, of course, the universities all clamped down on. So I think there's this reaction to prevent and restore the system against dissenting voices. So, yeah, there are parallels. And in the end, I mean, when you're asking about the parallels and the extent to which the Vietnam War was a good model, you think about the Iraq War. I mean, half the country was out in the streets, and it didn't change the government. Yeah. So even that level of dissent here didn't have an impact. As at the moment, our government is up to its neck in the Israeli horrors in Gaza. I mean, they pretend otherwise, but they're complicit.
So is that what is your take on Labor's sort of connection to?
Oh, Jesus.
Which you,
Well, look, one quick answer is that the Prime Minister Albanese and Wong have been referred to the International Criminal Court.
Really?
You didn't know that?
I didn't know that.
Of course, you go and check it. They've been referred to the International Criminal Court for culpable complicity.
Is that a legitimate court?
Right. Yeah, right. They're all anti-Semitic.
No, but there is some people in today's world. I know if you asked this question 10 years ago, is that even a legitimate court? That's a joke. But today, there is an argument that a lot of people are making that international law is a figment of imagination. It doesn't really matter. Like,
Well,
there's
in a way, that's right,
jurisdictional
because
issues.
they've got no teeth, these courts.
Right.
They can't implement anything. They make judgments, and there's no... Look, they're important just because they make certain declarations or statements which carry weight morally or intellectually and gives us some grounds to raise our voices. So it's not that they're not important, but they don't change anything. They're kind of ineffective in actually stopping anything. I mean,
It's almost symbolic. I mean, would you say the same of the UN? Kind of?
we're talking about the UN, yeah.
Oh, we're talking about the UN.
Well, I mean, UN instrumentality, all of them.
Sure.
Not to mention the difficulties of the Security Council and the vetoes and so on. They're not as effective as they should be or should have been.
Some critics argue that it always was like this. The only difference was that we had a unipolar moment where America dictated and could regulate these laws, where it seemed as if things were going according to law, but it was might as powerful. Whereas now, because there's rise of some other countries that are coming to that position, that America has decided that that facade needs to be taken out and the whole international system can be redundant.
Well, it is redundant if they can't act. I mean, the US has veto in the Security Council. Even now there was a vote, and basically even Russia and I think China abstained on the awful plans that Israel and the US have for Gaza. I mean, it's shocking. So the UN has lost a lot of its potential significance and credibility.
But another question that I'm interested in asking you is, I know you've been advocating for peace in the Middle East and
Peace with justice. It's not
peace
just
with
peace.
justice. Peace with
It
justice.
makes a big difference.
For a long time. At a time when there was a few intellectuals like yourself and some famous ones like Chomsky who were but generally the population either didn't care or was perhaps misinformed on some of the things. But now you can see a sea change, at least in public opinion, which didn't exist before. Are you proud, or how do you feel about that?
Well, look, I think it's important what you're saying. It's not enough. The Zionist lobby, Israel lobby, is still enormously influential for reasons that are hard to understand. This government has appointed the worst possible people to be, policing so-called anti-Semitism. The worst Zionist propagandists and partisan group are part of now this, what do they call it, envoy against anti-Semitism. It's bullshit. I mean, look, I'm Jewish. I grew up in this country. I always have to say this. I suppose there's some anti-Semitism in the fringe right-wing, groups. But, it's very important to say, I've said this and I have to be careful because I got into trouble for overstating it. I don't want to say there's no anti-Semitism in this country. I grew up and I haven't experienced any ever in my entire life in this country.
Right.
And more importantly, I go to every rally. I've been to every rally for over 2 years now for Palestine. I can say absolutely categorically, there is no anti-Semitism anywhere at any of the rallies for 2 years. And that's why when I give speeches there, I'm proud to be invited to speak. I make a point of calling out the Jewish group that's always there with a banner. And I always make a point of saying what I've just said to you, and it gets a big cheer from the audience. That's to put on the record. It's not for the audience. They don't need to hear that there's no anti-Semitism. It's for the Zionists that I just had a conversation with a Jewish friend. Oh, these rallies, they're all anti-Semitic. They say from the river to the sea, and that's bullshit. They're not trying to get rid of... And by the way, I quote the leading Palestinian spokesman who will use the slogan, as I do. I'll say from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free. It means liberation. And the spokesman, the leading Palestinian voices, will say that means living in equality and justice for Jews and Palestinians.
Right.
They're always completely explicit. So the bullshit that's around in the community, this prejudicial smearing of the movement, it's completely inappropriate, but that's what we're up against.
And I suppose you can say some of the things you can say, and I don't want to say because I don't want to end up in an orange jumpsuit in Abu Ghraib in
Like
hot
for what?
Cuban
what can
weather.
You say what is it? What can I say that you can't say?
No, I mean, no, we all can
you're on the
say
same-
we
you're
all
on the
can say
same
whatever we
level
want, but
playing field.
I have a
Look, I think if I can say, you're right about one thing that I have to emphasise. The charge of anti-Semitism is making people quiet when they are fearful. For example, it's now become a kind of a controversial question, but now criticising Zionism or Israel is being conflated as though it's... Now, I get up at the rally and I say, fuck Zionism and fuck Israel. I say it deliberately so that, and of course it gets a cheer. I can say it, although people like me are going to be called self-hating Jews or something.
Yeah, which is another thing that is, how do you deal with... Do you have family... Your family must be upset with you.
Well, funny question. Look, I've got family in Israel.
Have you been to Israel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I've been quite a lot to Israel and to Palestine. I first went there. I've got family in Israel. My mother's family are all in Israel as Israelis.
Right.
And I visited them. One of the old guy, I've done a documentary with him and we're finishing. He had the Auschwitz tattoo on his arm.
Wow.
And he said to me that I asked him when did he arrive in Israel. He said on the day that the State of Israel was proclaimed. That's the 14th of May, 1948. So I've got that family there. I haven't been in touch since October 7. I mean, I wrote to them, but we're not in touch. But my parents in Australia were both Holocaust survivors.
Wow.
But they weren't anti-Zionist. They weren't anti-Israel. In fact, my mother's cousin, my sort of uncle, he was the federal head of the JNF in Australia. The JNF is the Jewish National Fund, which is the agency. I mean, here in Australia, Jews have a thing called the blue box. You wouldn't know, but every Jew has a blue box in the family. They put coins in it. And it's in the cafe I go to, there's a blue box. It's money for Israel, but they all think it's a charity. It's actually, the JNF has a history of its responsibilities to expropriate Palestinian land for Jews only. Now, that's their job. So the JNF has a sinister quasi-governmental status in Israel. And my uncle, I grew up with my uncle for decades. He was the federal head of the JNF in Australia. We stopped talking after a while. We went to family dinners and wouldn't talk about anything once he realised what my views are. After I came back from the US, I mentioned Chomsky once, and that was kind of the end of the conversation. So yeah, my family's... But, I have to tell you, my mother and father survived the Holocaust. My mother and grandmother both survived Auschwitz. And I went there for the first time only just a few weeks ago. I'd never been before. I was at a conference in Poland, so I couldn't not go. And my mother, in that family environment, they weren't anti-Israel. Her family were in Israel. But slowly she, from me, started to find out the truth about the place. And so your question about whether it's been difficult in my family, in my immediate family, my mother and father started to learn what they didn't know. Look, all of the people in my age group, and I ask people, the most influential thing was a movie called Exodus, based on a book by Leon Uris, and a Hollywood movie starring Paul Newman and the beautiful Eva Marie Saint. And it was about the Jews coming from the Holocaust to the State of Israel. The theme music of that song was, "This land is our land, God gave this land to me." That was the theme music. And there was hardly, one token Arab appeared in it. And the famous slogan, which was used a lot, is this land is how does it go?
Is it an American song?
Yeah, a land without people for a people without a land. This is the bullshit. Now, that's still the most widely held view.
In fact, did you know that Exodus was directly funded by the Israeli government as a propagandic tool?
I didn't know that.
In fact, the star of the film, in his reflections, which are now public, you can say, he comments on the film saying, it's a wonderful propaganda movie.
Are you serious?
Yeah. The lead actor in the movie, I can't remember his name. Yes.
Oh, because he was a good guy. Yeah.
Wait, was he Aussie?
No.
Oh, sorry.
But he wasn't saying it as an insult to the film. He was saying it's a great propagandic tool. Yeah. And
propaganda was used differently then too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it had less of I think, bad connotation to it, perhaps. But
maybe, but the film was such a cynical exercise in justifying, and that's the narrative. So to get back to your interesting question, the story that everybody knows is this basic lie, and it's been very difficult for the truth to come out, and the Jewish community are mainly in denial about it. The truth is now hard to deny, but I'm surprised when I have some interactions with the Jewish community. They're not only in complete denial about the history of it, which is very, very ugly, They're in denial about what's going on currently in Gaza, which is hard to believe. It's very hard. Most people who are not Jews don't see what's going on in the Jewish community. And it's very worrying, this extent of I can't even describe it accurately, because how can you close your eyes and your conscience to the horrors, to have no empathy for the tragedy there, the human tragedy? It's shocking.
What do you think about the argument, again, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, is that there have been population transfers throughout history. There have been areas that have been conquered, certain areas that were surrendered, and the norm is that the victor shall take over the spoils.
Sure.
It's not much different to how we live in Australia with the indigenous population.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, we committed a genocide here too.
Yeah, and so that's an argument that is often given by certain realists, like Zionist realists, I suppose. What would you say
What's
to
realism?
that?
That's a euphemism for what? For justifying atrocities.
Well, it's a euphemism for if you're powerful, then you get to rule.
Yeah, right. Yeah, might is right.
Yeah,
that's not a virtuous moral position.
No.
That's a cynical statement of, sadly, the way the world works. Yeah, my Zionist uncle used to say that. Yeah, he'd start talking about the way history is. If you're the perpetrator of a murder, it's no kind of excuse to say, yeah, a lot of people are murdering people. What kind of answer is that morally? This is morally bankrupt for people to justify their own crimes on the basis of, yeah, everybody's doing it. Yeah, this is bullshit.
They also claim that when it comes to civilian casualties, that's part and parcel of war. I mean, they're saying it's not much different to American invasion of Iraq.
Who say that? What can you say to people who are so callously indifferent to the immense suffering? Maybe they don't see it and they can talk about it this way. Mind you, it's not symmetrical, because when it's their own suffering, they cry tears over their own suffering. Look at what's going on now. The Jewish community are wallowing in what happened in October 7. Okay, it was bad. There was some shit, some crimes and terrorism and whatever. It's a long, complicated story. Fine. But they're not paying attention to the atrocities, the genocide in Gaza since. What does that tell you about people? I'm having trouble with that, because I don't actually understand how they're capable of blocking their normal human sense of empathy for immense suffering that we're responsible for. We're responsible. So somehow there's this psychological mechanism where you find some way of just not taking that on board.
What do you think should have been the appropriate repercussion, the reaction to that, to October 7th? I mean, or is or would you say that it's like,
it's the wrong question to ask?
Okay, and
the reason it's the wrong question.
Do you think? Okay, here's an annoying question. Do you think Israel has a right to exist?
What a stupid fucking question.
Hey, finally you've gotten to the speed of this podcast.
I mean, yeah, you always get that.
Hey, you're the doctor.
Yeah. Look, yeah, right. Yeah. They always play this card and put people on the spot.
No. I'm not trying to.
No. It's fine. It's fine. It's a good question. I'm glad you asked.
Just as a, obviously, it's a gotchuism and whatnot. But how does one
answer that question?
Address something? Yeah,
look, it's a perfectly good question to ask me, because it's the gotcha question that is always asked. And then people on TV and elsewhere are always stuck in this difficult situation. I mean, one answer. I'll give you a couple of answers.
No, please.
One answer is, no state has a right to exist, in the sense that these are political realities, and does Australia have a right to exist? Well, we committed a genocide. Well, okay, we're here and we're part of the system, and that's the wrong question. The question is, does it have a right to exist as an ethno-nationalist, supremacist, genocidal, apartheid state? That's the question. And the answer to that is no.
Fair enough.
That's the question.
Yeah. Do you have sympathy for the argument that because of the history of the Jewish people, that such an ethno-state is a necessity for long-term survival? That's also an argument.
It's not true. And it's the opposite. Israel is now creating a danger for Jews all around the world, including the Israelis. The idea, it's like this insanity that some of these propagandists are saying, because of the anti-Semitism, the alleged anti-Semitism, Jews should all go to Israel. Well, that's the worst place to go. I mean, the future of Israel is very bleak, because, if you listen to Ilan Pape and other experts on this, they're not going to recover from this easily. They're going to be a pariah state. I mean, Israelis can't go around the world now showing Israeli flags, and for good reason. They're rightly reviled for this horror. And so what's the question? Does Israel, protect all Jews, or
that's the argument that in order.
It was never true. It was never true. Even after the Second World War, I mean, it has to. You can only run this line, which they do, of course. That it was a haven, like for my parents after the Holocaust, and there's no question the Jews after the Holocaust had to be dealt with. They should have been given half of Germany. I mean, if you're going to give away somebody's country, why do you give away the Palestinians?
Yeah, because there were other options too. Apparently, Madagascar was an option.
They looked into other options. They did,
right?
And they settled on Palestine. Yeah, the Zionists. Firstly, the Zionists, of the time, and Theodor Herzl, they weren't religious Jews. Even it was a sort of a political agenda. There's no doubt that there had to be a solution to the anti-Semitism in Europe, especially after the Second World War. I mean, one can take that seriously as it deserves to be taken, but you can't think that the Palestinians had to pay the price for that. That's just absolutely appalling. And ever since, and by the way, the history of that goes back a long way. I've been very interested in the 1917 period and the Balfour Declaration. Basically, we fucked over the Palestinians from the beginning. The British, the whole story is a very sad, very interesting, sad story about how the big powers, first the British and then subsequently...
Why do you think the British were convinced to do all of this? What was their main incentive?
Guilt, maybe, or no?
Well, not yet. I mean, I think part of it... Firstly, they were anti-Semitic. Balfour and others were quite explicit. They hated the Jews. They didn't love them. They had other motives. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a historian, but I understand... They had some motives for wanting to get rid of the Jews. And I think that's part of the story. But it's a very ugly story about the way... the Balfour Declaration was written by Chaim Weizmann and by the American judge Brandeis. They cooked this up. The wording of it is very interesting. It says that the British recognise the need for a homeland, a home for the British government or something, recognises the need for a home for the Jews. They meant a state. They knew from the beginning that it was intended to expropriate the Palestinians. It was very clear. And so this was a cynical attempt to displace the Palestinians at enormous cost from the beginning. There were waves and waves of Jews started to come into, and of course the Palestinians were for good reason, upset about. They were very originally sympathetic and on good relations with their Jews. People who know or you hear them talk about that history, the Palestinians and the Jews got on well in Palestine. They looked after each other's kids. They lived in harmony and warmth together until Zionism started to create this horror.
Yeah, in fact, there's a famous model, Gigi Hadid. I don't know if you know her. She's a Palestinian-American model.
Intellectual.
I mean, she's very famous, and she... her mom had a story where she said that her grandparents had welcomed a Jewish family into their house, as a lot of people did, which was a tradition then, and they had gone to a wedding in a different city, and then they just couldn't come back to that house ever again.
Oh yeah, you hear stories like that.
I don't know if this is exactly true, because this is an anecdote.
Like that. They're excluded from their own homes and so on.
But so I wanted to bring one thing up with you, because I don't know if you've been following this, and it's a lot of what you've said about anti-Semitism in the West. I do largely agree, but there are some lately in the last few years, particularly post October 7th, there is a faction within the far right, which has become very vocal about its anti-Semitism and its final solutions as well. Recently there was a protest in Sydney. I don't know if you remember the Abolish the Jewish lobby. And again, there's a very famous podcaster who has millions of followers. Wow. His name's Nick Fuentes. I don't know if you're aware of him. He is they're calling him the voice of the modern Republican, and he is essentially a white nationalist.
Here in Australia?
No, he's in the US. He's in the US. He's a white nationalist, and he has very, let's just say, old school views about Jews. Yeah.
Look, I don't have any doubt that there's rabid anti-Semitism on the right. That exists. We have to deal with that. I mean, here too, I think you mentioned, there was a neo-Nazi rally outside Parliament House. Interestingly, the anti-Semitism envoy didn't say a word about it. How about that? She's had to sort of fudge and mumble an excuse about that when she was interviewed. But so there's anti-Semitism, and I'm going to be at the front of the struggle and the battle against real anti-Semitism. So it's not like I don't get it.
It's but what you're
It's
saying
not like
is
people like me don't know. And my Palestinian friends will be at the forefront of that struggle as well, because they're also against anti-Semitism and all kinds of racism.
Right.
So fine, that's serious, but you have to be very careful about not conflating anti-Israel views, which are justified, and of course the IHRA definition, which is now taking over, it conflates them deliberately.
Right.
It's trying to trick everybody. And by the way, it's got a long history. I often quote Abba Eban, who was the Israeli ambassador to the UN. He said, when anybody criticizes Israel, make sure that you make out that that's anti-Semitism.
I mean,
so there's a long history.
You can see, I mean, I'm sort of, it's a bit of a cop-out, but try to tout myself as a centrist or something, but there's blatantly obvious examples where people, like representatives, will like smear something as being anti-Semitic when it's like such a crazy stretch, and they're probably like funded by particular organizations.
Well, look, whatever they're funded by, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
One of the list of claims by the IHRA is that describing Israel as a racist endeavor is anti-Semitic. Well, this is only people who are ignorant will say that, because actually, if you look at the laws, there's a group in Haifa called Adallah, which is an NGO, a legal group. There are about 50 laws on the books that discriminate against Palestinians, about non-Jews. So calling Israel a racist, apartheid endeavor, there are reports by the leading human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. It's an apartheid state in a strict sense. Israel in 2018 declared what's called the nation-state law. It now declares that it's the state of the Jewish people only. 20% of the population are not Jewish. Now, so why is it anti-Semitic to call that out? That's the trick. In fact, by the way, that word trick, the Israeli member of Knesset, of their parliament, called Shulamit Aloni, many years ago, she was on Democracy Now! And she was asked about this, and she famously said, anti-Semitism, it's a trick, we always use it to shut up criticism of Israel. Wow. And then we always invoke the Holocaust. So this is not news, but it's still working, which is the trouble. That's why people like me have to start to try and push back and declare our credentials, as it were, which is very weird.
Have you copped blowback?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's difficult because I've got good credentials, having Holocaust parents gives me a kind of a,
legitimacy.
So, well, yeah. And
you have the
I'm harder to dismiss. People like me are called self-hating Jews. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Bullshit. It's kind of this cuckoo psychological, diagnosis. Basically, they just want to silence people, whatever trick you use. But look, I've been assaulted in Double Bay by other Jews. And I get abused regularly.
What?
Well,
What do you mean?
It was like Have you ever seen Curb Your Enthusiasm, the show?
Yeah.
Did you watch that episode where they're going to a Palestinian chicken shop and someone wears a yarmulke? I don't know. You just having a fight just reminded me of that scene.
He's very clever. That stuff is very good. But I was in Double Bay and I was actually on my phone and somebody came from behind and hit me very hard and then started abusing me.
Wow.
Being, every swear word you can think of and a self-hating fucking Jew and all that.
So he knew you?
No, I have no idea what it is. I get abused from a lot of people I don't know because they know who I am. I'm quite visible. I mean, I'm very public.
Right.
I mean, I hear from other Jews, like just the other day, Jews in the community, they talk about me because they know, I mean, I'm very public. I mean, I'm proud of it in a way. I'm at the rallies and I said something at UTS once which they didn't like and that went all over, went viral. So, for example, I gave a talk at a rally at the UTS and there was a Jewish student holding up the Israeli flag, and I departed from my text saying that Jews should feel uncomfortable about what's going on, and I said especially that guy holding the flag. Well, that was now all over the place, that I called out a poor Jewish guy and I pointed him out and he's feeling fearful. What a lot of bullshit. So, and that goes viral, so the Jewish community decide that I'm some kind of bad guy. And I live in the eastern suburbs and I go down to the cafe in Double Bay and I get a lot of ugly reactions there. I go down deliberately. I mean, fuck them. I mean,
oh my goodness.
Well,
he's an agitator.
No. But
doctor.
In the past, for example, someone will say something. I say, "Do you want to talk to me? You just want to be rude to me? Let's sit down and talk."
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
You want to talk? Let's have a conversation.
Have a conversation. Yeah.
And of course they don't. Which it must be something perverse in me. But I try to engage. For example, there's a Jewish festival called Limud Oz, and I presented for a couple of years and I got banned. But I made a point of going, I still go along, because I made presentations to try to engage with the Jewish community. I think that's a responsibility, and not many people can do it. The Palestinian activist movement don't do that very well. Mind you, there's a very important group called the Jewish Council of Australia that emerged recently. They're terrific and they're very important. And they're anti-Zionist and critical of Israel, and they've got a lot of good people on their committee. So that's a very important development to show that there are Jews who are against what Israel is doing.
Yeah, and that would be a tough thing to be ostracized by your community that way. And
I don't mind being ostracized. I mean, look, I married a non-Jewish girl, so I'm already out of it, I'm already, that's the worst crime, marrying out is that's serious for some Jews. I had a friend, anyway, it's a long story.
Is it easier for women to marry outside?
No, marrying out is a terrible sin. Because look, they say ugly things about it. It's a way of maintaining a kind of ethnic purity. And look, a lot of Jews do marry out, but that's part of it. But it's not so much even marrying out, it's speaking out against the Jewish community. In a way, they don't mind so much if you say rude things inside the community, but the moment you are public.
Right.
For example, I remember vividly in 1982, I can remember that far back, I was invited to give a talk to a Jewish group. And they still invited me in those days. And I went to talk to them about philosophy, not about politics. It was in the middle of Israelis' bombardment of Lebanon. They were bombing the shit out of Lebanon. Thousands of people were killed by the Israeli bombardment. And they said, look, before I talk to the group, would I mind if an emissary from Israel would address the group? And I remember vividly, he said, yeah, it looks pretty bad on television, but he gave all sorts of excuses why Israel's doing something that's okay. And the main point was, however bad it looks, don't talk about it outside. Rabbis were encouraging Jews to not talk outside. Now that is very powerful, because then there's this, however guilty or ashamed they feel, they don't break ranks. That's the whole history of the psychology of this. Famous studies of that. So even if today a lot of Jews are squirming, I don't know how many, in Australia fewer, I hear from personal cases, their family would disown them if they would. So look, for me it's been easy. I mean, my family's not going to disown me, and wouldn't have. But for some, I get it. I understand why some are reluctant. I mean, look, if you're in a family that's all full on Zionist, you don't want your children and your parents and everybody to disown you. It's not easy. I don't underestimate the difficulty, but that's part of the problem.
I want to talk to you about some other things aside from Israel and Palestine, but I wanted to maybe, unless you have something else to ask, I wanted to wrap it up. What do you think is the ideal solution to the problem? I mean, I know it's not in your hands, but if it was, because there's that common thing, two-state solution, that's the only way to go, but then there's other arguments saying like it's not feasible anymore, the boundaries will be impossible to do. So how do we get out of this?
Look, I'm very good friends. I just had an email with one of the prominent advocates of the one state, harmonious, equal, democratic state.
Which is also the Chomsky solution, if I remember.
No, Chomsky was skeptical about that. He was pushing the two-state, although it's becoming increasingly difficult to see how that's possible. There are 700 or 800,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank illegally, and the army's rampaging around, and they've made the West Bank kind of impossible. But one nice thing to say that one of my Palestinian friends have said, the difficulty now is that one state, I mean, how does it go? Two-state solution is impossible. It's too late for that, and it's too soon for one state. And the reason for that is very interesting. One state, according to Jeff Halper and important Jewish Israeli advocates of one state, see a vision, and my Palestinian friends now increasingly recognize that you can't have two states anymore, it's finished. So they advocate, and it's interesting, the Jews don't accept this. If you ask them, will you accept a democratic equal state where everybody has equal rights? They won't say yes, which is very revealing. So, okay, that's very now increasingly widely held among the pro-Palestinian.
Sorry to just interject you. You can continue, but John Mearsheimer's argument is that they're not ready for it because they want to expel the populations of Gaza and West Bank
first. That's the Jews. That's
to move the 50-50 ratio to 20-80 ratio.
No, that's quite right. So that's why the difficulty is not on the Palestinian side, who settled, signed agreements for pathetic two-state, which is such a small fraction of their original state. The difficulty is the hatred, the racism on the Jewish side. Israel is a lunatic state. I'm quoting Norman Finkelstein and Gideon Levy and others. The idea of one state with people who are so filled with delusional, pathological hatred, which is just the way it is. How can you have one state? So it's not clear how you can, even if somebody would declare that now there's the one state, the 20% I mentioned that are currently citizens of Israel that are not Jewish, they're discriminated against in the most awful ways. So how can you have one state? It's not clear. And
while they're discriminated against, it's a very common talking point for Zionists to say, if you think we're really mean to Muslims, look at our own. We give them equal respect. And every time they say, but that's not the case. Even we are suffering under your rule. Yeah. So there is this propagandic point that, the 20% that live within Israel proper, they have equal rights.
Well, they don't. They have certain rights, obviously. They're represented in the Knesset. It's better than living in the West Bank. But certainly not. Just, I mentioned that the formal discriminations, apart from the informal discriminations, it's horrible. Okay, that's not like the West Bank, which is just intolerable. Israelis are rampaging around. It's been much worse since October 7 because people are not paying attention to the Gaza. I have the good fortune of having now a kind of an online Zoom conversation with a young woman who I met in the old city in Jerusalem when we were filming there recently. We did a documentary, and she was the receptionist in the Austrian hospice right on the Via Dolorosa, and she was offering to teach me Arabic online, so we didn't ever get around to it, but we have Zoom conversations. It's shocking to hear her stories. She commutes from Ramallah across the Kalandia crossing, which is just a nightmare from the brutality of the Israelis there, and just outside the door, some Palestinian was shot dead. I mean, it's a nightmare. So the Palestinians are now, how many have been shot dead since the last year or two? So the West Bank is a nightmare story. It's not getting any news. And that's the West Bank. It's not Gaza.
And it doesn't even have Hamas.
Which?
It doesn't even have Hamas, because there is also a point that all evil stems from Hamas, but they conveniently ignore that in West Bank there's no Hamas, but the attitude is exactly the same.
They've got, they beat up Mahmoud Abbas, but he's a collaborator. The Palestinian Authority are notorious for basically being stooges, outsourcing the occupation for Israel.
Donald Trump's a big fan of Mahmoud Abbas. Have you ever heard him comment on Mahmoud Abbas?
Yeah.
He says that he is not a fan of Benjamin. This is when he was out of power before he came back in, and he commented that he hated Benjamin Netanyahu, how he was constantly lying, and he said Mahmoud Abbas reminded him of his father and seemed a very sweet old man.
Great.
Which is just shocking to see.
Who's he?
Mahmoud Abbas is the leader of the Palestinian, so just the leader of West Bank in a sense.
He's the leader of the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah political party.
So the opposition to Hamas.
Yeah.
Oh, and
mind you, if there was an election, a free election, Hamas would be elected in the West Bank.
Right.
Not everybody loves Hamas. There's a whole story to tell about Hamas. They're not as bad as they're made out to be. They're a religious brotherhood, but they're fanatical and scrupulous in their maintaining of order and running Gaza, and they're not corrupt. Whatever else is wrong with them, and they would be voted for that reason. Now they've agreed to relinquish control of Gaza, surprisingly.
Right.
I mean, it's not a fair demand the world and Israel are making that they should lay down their arms and not run the place. Surprisingly, they've agreed to that.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
And but there's no hope that makes any difference. No matter what they've agreed to, there've been a very sad history of the number of times they've agreed to various quite reasonable arrangements, and that's not what Israel ever wanted.
Actually, on that note, there's a very famous line that who's that lawyer who defended OJ?
The Dershowitz.
Alan
Dershowitz. Yeah, Dershowitz says that Palestinians have had many opportunities to settle. But according to him, his quote is, they never fail to miss an opportunity.
I know, that's the usual bullshit. Yeah. I mean, look, if anybody's serious about this, you can easily check the extent to which the Palestinians have, the West Bank and generally the Palestinians have repeatedly agreed to some kind of settlement, including Hamas. I can list it. It's available. I can't do it here quickly, but, we have to understand that the mainstream presentation of this is distorting the reality to make sure that we don't understand what's going on. So we don't really see the source of the problem and what would be a just solution.
That's almost depressing. But
it's heavy.
If Mislav, unless you have something else to say, I want to move this conversation to a very nerdy interest of mine. I know that you are Chomsky is a hero of yours, but you've actually met the man, which makes me very jealous. How did you meet him? How did you?
Yeah,
well, it's a good story. So I was studying his work when I first got to graduate school in the US. Chomsky's work was all the rage in philosophy. He really was dominant in understanding of the mind and the debates, and in philosophy it became very important, because he has radically alternative views of language and the mind, and philosophy of language is a big thing. The leading philosophers of language, excuse me, Chomsky disagrees with them all. The top names, Quine and Davidson. I should say I'm writing an intellectual biography of Chomsky.
But Chomsky's opinion on language, although I would admit it's a minority opinion amongst the intellectuals, but it is so enticing.
Well, I'm glad you think so. Most people don't think so.
Well, let's talk about this, because one of the things that Chomsky says, and I think you are of the similar opinion, that language is the communication aspect of language is a byproduct of itself. What do you think language is originally for?
Wait a minute. Let me come back to that. Let me just finish my story about how I got to know Chomsky. So, because I was full of his work, and I originally did my PhD on his work, I submitted a different one, but that was my whole intellectual academic interest. And I got involved with the East Timorese activist movement here. And they had invited him to come to Australia at a moment of great crisis when Indonesians were about to flatten the country. And Chomsky had been a great advocate, and he'd written about the situation in East Timor. And they invited him to come here to speak on their behalf. So they invited him. But because I knew them and I was interested in Chomsky, and I hadn't met him yet, I said to them, look, they hadn't got any money. They had a little room cupboard for an office in Parramatta, and I said, look, for Chomsky, if you're willing and he's willing, I'll get the university to pay for it. Because if he's willing to give a lecture, as he does, he likes to give academic and political lectures wherever he goes. So I didn't want to steal their limelight. But I said, look, this could work. So yeah, that's what happened. Chomsky agreed to it, and they did. And I went to the vice-chancellor of the university, and I said, look, do you want Chomsky? And of course they jumped at it. Yeah. And Chomsky came and he gave 2 lectures at the university. I met him at the airport. It was the biggest moment in my life, meeting Chomsky. I can't tell you.
How is he as a person personally? Like, it's the same, I would imagine.
You got to understand that people either love him or hate him.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I'm writing about this, and he's reviled and revered in equal numbers.
Yeah.
And I found him a lovable, sweet guy. He's like your old uncle. The weirdest thing was, he's the most important person I've ever met. And I felt comfortable with him. I've met pretty important people, and I'm intimidated by them. I feel, Jesus, they're such big shots. Chomsky makes you feel like he's your old uncle. and he's just a remarkable guy. So I enjoyed the encounters with him. I'd have several meetings. And he came back to Australia to win the Sydney Peace Prize, and I was his chauffeur with my co-author, the co-author of our intellectual biography, Professor Clinton Fernandez from Canberra. And we were his chauffeur and bodyguard, and we took him around the country. These were the best experiences.
That's amazing.
What was he interested in besides his intellectual pursuits? Where did you take him? Luna Park? Did he go on the roller coaster?
No, we took him on. We made a mistake. We thought we'd be tour guides for him and show him around Sydney, and we took him to the Blue Mountains and on one of the 2 visits, and he's walking there, and he put his hand to his heart, and he said he's got angina, and I thought, shit, I'm going to be famous for killing Noam Chomsky. he started anyway, so
it's a bit of a drag.
So
that was the first time he probably left his MIT office room in 20 years.
Yeah, So that's your my experience with him. But I've had the good luck to correspond with him since. I visited his house once in Boston when I went there. He was very generous and sweet. I don't know how he has time for anything. He just writes so much.
He writes. Apparently, he replies. Well, everyone. Now unfortunately not, because he's
every school kid who writes to him.
Anyone that would
really.
But I was always extremely afraid to email him. Yeah. I have spent months of my life thinking what I would. But
you should have emailed him. You should have just emailed him. Does Israel have a right to exist?
Dude, I could
he would reply.
You reckon he would reply?
He would reply.
Really?
School kids write him. Dear Mr. Chomsky, what's your linguistic theory?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's so amazing that
he spent enormous amounts of his time.
But I might not have emailed Chomsky, but I did email you quite a few times, and I must say you always replied.
Wow.
I'm so glad.
In fact,
amazing.
I eventually got bored of that.
I'm not sure I'm always so virtuous, but no.
No, you were virtuous with me at least. But so the language, this is one of the most interesting fields of research, and I think it is you've actually dedicated your life to this, the study of language. And I think also the study of mentology, if I'm not wrong.
Of which?
Is that the word? Maybe I made that word, but like brain science, I suppose.
Yeah, neuroscience.
Brain psychology.
Look, I'm a philosopher by profession. So, but philosophy changed during my career, where they started to pay serious attention to the sciences, to psychology, to neuroscience, to artificial intelligence. That happened in my career. It shifted. Philosophers used to sit around in the armchair just, thinking what you would say about something without any knowledge. And there are important people in philosophy who wrote significant scientific works to bring philosophers into a scientific understanding. That's had an interesting history. For a long time during my career, philosophers of mind were what we call materialists. The idea was that the mind is just the body, that there's only the brain. Now, with important philosophers like David Chalmers and many others, they've become skeptical about that. They've got reasons for arguing that, it's physics and chemistry can't explain everything. That's still a hot topic. I don't share that view. I think they're making mistakes. I've written a book recently that is looking at all these debates. And so anyway, that's an interesting question, how the sciences bear on.
And they always say that we don't know, we know very little about brain psychology. Why have we not been studying on that for the longest time?
We have. Look, it depends on how you look at this. We know an enormous amount about the brain. Certainly at the lowest levels, the structure of neurons and their cells and the membranes and the ions going in and out of membranes. We have an extraordinary knowledge of the individual low-level behavior of the cells and so on. The trouble is there's 10 to the 4th or 10 to the 9th neurons in the brain. It's an immensely big and complex object. So the complexity of it to some considerable extent is the reason we can't figure out what it's doing. But they've studied simpler organisms like the famous sea slug, Aplysia, and they've mapped the entire nervous system of this little slug. The guy won the Nobel Prize for that, Eric Kandel. So with simpler neural systems, you can study them and learn how they work. So look, it's an ongoing, wonderful research program. The philosophers, though, get into all sorts of bizarre arguments for thinking that in the end, none of this is going to explain certain crucial features of thought and consciousness. I don't think those arguments are any good, but they're very persuasive.
So how do you think, can you describe consciousness then?
Yeah, I think it's an illusion. That's one way to put it, which is a funny thing to say. It depends on how you understand consciousness. A dog is conscious, but the philosophers have a peculiar paradox, which is really thinking about thinking. When you're conscious of being conscious, it's a kind of introspective puzzle. One of the most important papers that I'm always quoting was written years ago by a guy called Keith Gunderson, who said that the puzzle of consciousness is the puzzle of trying to fit yourself into a physical world, because when you try to think about yourself, you come into a kind of a self-referential paradox. It's very hard to understand yourself, but I got no trouble understanding you. You're just a physical object. No, neuroscience has no puzzles except in the scientific sense. It's not a philosophical puzzle. But a lot of people have written, I'm not the only one, but there's a woman called Avramidis written a very good book about how when you think about yourself, you're stuck with certain kinds of seemingly deep puzzles. But that's the wrong way to approach it. Those are puzzles and they're real. I've written about that, and I think Descartes was important in his famous writings about that. So I've tried to show how, yes, we have a puzzle when we think about our own mind, but that's not a scientific problem. That's a kind of a self-referential paradox. You got to read my book.
So we're just too biased to understand ourselves?
It's not bias. I've tried to give a formal structure to show why self-reference. Let me give you Gunderson's example. If you had a scanner, a TV camera, and you wanted to scan everything in the whole universe, there's one thing that will never appear on the screen.
Yourself,
camera. Well, that's not a metaphysical, scientific problem. It's a simple logical fact. It's not deep theoretical issue.
I was going to
Gunderson used that as an analogy.
I was going to make a bad joke there. I thought you were going to. When you said there was nothing you would see, I was like a two-state solution.
No, leave that out of it.
Sorry, no, I didn't. I'd never heard of that. So you're saying that if the camera filmed the entire universe, it's never going to see itself?
Well, look, obviously it can't see itself.
Yeah,
but that and Wittgenstein in his Tractatus, he has a famous picture of an eye, and the field of vision of the eye is the world. But there's one thing that doesn't appear in that field of vision: the eye.
So then,
what an eye is not a philosophical problem. Now, that's Wittgenstein, and Gunderson develops that. So when you think of it like that, you start off with, firstly, materialism. The scientific picture of the world is so thorough. The idea that we're somehow not part of it, or our minds aren't explicable in terms of science, is a bizarre position to adopt when we have so much science now.
I find it frustrating because it sort of detaches us, our connection to the universe.
Exactly. And that's what currently is quite fashionable among philosophers.
Well, here's another question, because I know you're an atheist, if I'm not wrong. Well, this is something that I've struggled with as well, with my own atheism, which is then you get this feeling that, am I a materialist? Is it really just all of this?
Yeah, I share the puzzle, but the best science and the most informed understanding is, we're physical objects. I don't like it either. I don't like being an atheist. I wish there was a God. But you can't talk yourself into bad theories.
But there is also a beauty to, this is one thing I find, it's like, there is a romantic kind of beauty to believing that you are just from stardust connected to the universe. Why is that
romantic and beautiful?
It just is.
No, it isn't.
You don't think it is?
No.
Why?
Because it's bullshit.
But you just said it's true.
That we're made of stardust.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
But that's
physics. Oh, I see. You're on my side.
Yes.
I get it. I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
I'm saying
I thought you were being mystical.
No. Well, I kind of am.
No, you're not. You're being
he's being
scientific.
mystical a little bit.
I'm saying, I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying it can be. It shouldn't be seen as this sort of kind of like completely scientific.
No, that's the wonder of human life and the mind.
Sure.
No, that's what the great scientists will say. No, I share your view. About that.
Yeah.
No, you're right.
Because there's a beauty to that.
There is. I agree with that.
Yeah.
There is like an interesting fact that I don't know if you've noticed this, but religiosity is actually increasing in our society, in every society. There's more people. Well, there's an argument to be made whether that religiosity is actually a declaration of faith or more of an identity. So you can sort of argue it both ways. But that is not to say that young people today are more religious than, for example, when I was their age. There was this understanding that I grew up with when I was 19, 20, that we're all moving towards atheism. Like, some people are just sort of lagging on, but that is the objective truth. And eventually society will move towards that sooner or later.
I'm not convinced about that as a social fact. I don't know the data on that.
Well, no, not only, but clearly I would say that was incorrect, because I think there is data to say that more people are claiming themselves to be Christian, Muslim, whatever you.
It seems to go, that cycle seems to be coming back to that.
Young people have this appreciation for old school church. There's this, I guess it's nostalgic or whatever you might call it, but there's a greater role that religion is playing in people's lives.
I'm sort of sympathetic to that for other reasons. I know some atheists are very contemptuous of religious belief. I don't share that. And so for example, to talk about philosophers, Hitchens and Dawkins and Harris, they wrote this awful kind of scathing attack on religious belief. By the way, they were such crooks. I've written an article to expose their deceitfulness about religious belief, especially Islam, which they...
When Chomsky thinks that Dawkins should not belong in that list. Because I remember listening to one of his interviews and someone mentioned Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, and one more guy. And Chomsky said, well, I don't think that Richard Dawkins should be included in that list.
But he's a card-carrying member of that list in the sense that he shares the scathing...
I think Chomsky likes Selfish Gene. I think that's what it was.
Well,
I think he respects him as an intellectual.
I do too. No, he's brilliant. That's what makes it interesting. All of them, Hitchens, Dawkins, even sadly, Daniel Dennett was part of that crowd. No, the reason that's interesting, and the reason I wrote an article about them, was that they're the smartest guys on the planet. They're the best informed. And they've got these awful, really unfounded views of Islam and religion And it's sort of disgraceful. I wrote this article to expose, I mean, they weren't like the shock jocks that, or Islamophobic, people who write awful stuff. These were smart guys. And I tried to show how, for example, when they talked about the Vietnam War, it's hard to explain the kind of delusional misrepresentation that's coming from the smart guys.
I want to believe that it's not deceit. I think they're just not that well versed with Islam.
No, that's not true. That's worse. They're very well versed. And if you read my paper, you'll see that they're denying facts which everybody knows. This is a very interesting pathology of the smart guys. I always quote George Orwell. He said, some ideas are so stupid only intellectuals could believe them. And this is the slow, that's not quite verbatim, but he says something like that.
Yeah.
I quote that, and there's several works of that genre that expose, that's why I wrote this, because that's the interesting stuff. Where the ordinary shock jocks who are Islamophobic, that doesn't count,
You don't think any of that argument is justified? Any of their critiques of Islam?
Well, no. I mean, look, yeah, you have to read what I've written.
Sure.
I mean, I go through in careful detail to expose the deceitfulness, the fraudulence of these smart guys.
Sure.
It's actually disgraceful, and the moral lapse on their part. And I was just going to go back to the fact, look, I've been invited quite regularly to debate with Muslims. I enjoy that.
I've actually seen one of those.
Oh, yeah.
Was it with Hamza Stortis or something?
I've had several. And I'm also invited by the Christians. The Jews don't invite me too often. But
by the way, I loved one of your arguments. May I say which argument I loved? You said the topic was, how is it likely that this world came into being? And you said, well, every card hand that's been dealt is unique in itself. And if that's the one hand you'd imagine this is common, but that was actually one of very interesting points.
Yeah, the probability arguments are all spurious.
Yeah.
All accidents look like they're improbable and happen all the time. But I was just going to add that I have a lot of respect and a lot of admiration and affection for a lot of my Muslim and religious believing friends. They believe for also, I don't have to share exactly their motives or their understandings, but the idea that they're all, let me put it in a slogan. I think I say this in the article. What's worse, believing some things like believing a God for which there's not really good evidence, or believing things for which there's overwhelming evidence against it? And that's what Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens do. They believe things for which there's overwhelming evidence they know about. Now, which is worse? Believing in Santa Claus is not that bad. No, in my view, it's not morally a serious lapse like it is for these guys. So that's an important distinction. I mean, these guys are into a worse kind of denialism, and it's morally reprehensible. And of course, it has a political consequence, because look at Harris and the others. They think that Islamic countries and all the Islamic, terror. Who commits the war and the worst terror in the world? Is it Islamic terror, or is it the United States atheist, agnostic, terror around the world? What if you just add up Latin America and Southeast Asia and the Middle East? Who's responsible for more terror in the world?
It's hard to argue against that.
Well, yeah,
really, even for you?
Sorry?
Even for you, miss?
Look, you give me a lot to think about, Doctor. You give me a lot to think about.
The shock jock reference that you were making, I mean, one of them might sit on this couch right now. Let's just say he's passionate about ethnic issues.
Oh, okay. Well,
no, I'm not. I just.
Sorry, I'm throwing him under the bus.
You're Islamophobic.
I'm.
Come on, own up.
I'm Islamophobic. I think.
Would you
maybe,
consider being?
Why? Well, how many Muslims do you know?
One. And he's an atheist. No, I'm not.
I'm as Muslim as you are Jewish.
I think, you know what it is? I think I'm susceptible to emotional arguments sometimes that my own cognitive biases
that's an honest answer. Yeah. Look, I get that.
Yeah. But I'm also, you know what I am? I'm, what's the word? Impressionable.
Well, we all are.
But very impressionable. Like
he is very impressionable.
Today I've been doing this job where I'm cleaning windows. Can't all be doctors, I'm joking. But like, this gentleman basically gave me a 4-hour conversation explaining why like Labour suck and Liberals are really good. And he made a pretty convincing argument, and I'm just like, well, now I don't know what to be. I'm almost
what was the convincing argument?
But look,
I
admire what you're saying, because that means you've got an open mind.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, I do, and I'm also, I try not to be, dogmatic with my belief.
That's a virtue. That's a virtue.
Hey, I
and that's to your credit, because a lot of people aren't capable of taking seriously other views. So that just means you've got work to do to sort out what the fuck is going on.
Exactly. Sure, definitely. Yeah.
How do you deal with this? Today, you'll tell him, and he is right. If you give him a good argument, that he will change his opinion.
Well, that makes you unusual, and to your credit.
But,
thank you.
However, what also makes him even more unusual is that if someone else gives him another argument, he'll change immediately.
That's okay. Look, that just means
it's tiring for me.
No, I know, but that's okay. That's a virtue. It just means that you are open to arguments.
Yes, of
the
course.
The opposite is worse.
Definitely.
You come with me to Double Bay and try and talk as I've done. I've actually thought, what would it take to change them? What facts could I cite? What does, some people are absolutely impervious to.
I know.
Now, that's not a virtue.
No, I agree.
There's a lot been written about this. I've written about it. So, for example, there's a wonderful article by Arthur Koestler called "The God That Failed," and he talks about when he was a committed communist, a member of the party, and totally committed to it. And he talks about what it felt like, and then what it felt like after he lapsed. He looked back on his previous self and what it felt like to be a totally ideologically committed thinker without allowing dissident thoughts to come into your mind. I've written a lot about this because these are really interesting, difficult questions.
Yeah, they are.
And most people are not capable of taking seriously views that are contrary to their own. I give my students John Stuart Mill to read. I'm always quoting him. He has a wonderful passage in his essay on liberty, on the liberty of thought and discussion, where he says, it's almost verbatim, he says, the most intolerant of churches, the Catholic Church, at the canonization of a saint, will even then listen to the devil's advocate, the worst that can be said. So he says, even the most intolerant of churches listens to the other side before they make somebody. Now that's the model. John Stuart Mill, that's Chomsky's view, by the way, where, you have to hear and give free speech to the views you hate. Most people are not capable of that. I
totally agree with that take. That's the thing. I don't like to shut down any. I might be repelled by an idea, but I don't like censorship.
Well, you've got to make at some point you come to some, settled view of things. I mean, I've got some views, but I think, look, maybe because I'm a teacher, but look, philosophers and teachers aren't all virtuous either. But I spent a lot of my life arguing, and so you have to take arguments seriously. And also, what really helps? Where you don't have a prior commitment. I have the good fortune of not being brought up in a religious family. I didn't have dogma or theology or politics. I didn't even get politics at home.
Yeah, do I?
That's
really?
Good luck, because you don't start off with a bias.
That's
you
true.
kind of you don't know. And that's actually good luck.
Yeah.
So I was capable of just thinking independently. I remember when I was 12 years old, I had a very religious Jewish friend. I was very fond of him. He's become an ultra-Orthodox religious guy. And we once argued about God when we were 12. And I said to him, the only reason you believe in God is your religious upbringing, And he said to me something which I didn't know how to answer at the time. He says, yeah, but the only reason you don't believe in God is because of your upbringing. That was a good answer, but I didn't know how to answer that. But it's not symmetrical. I didn't get Bertrand Russell to read, every day at night by my parents.
But I was given Bertrand Russell to read every night by my parent. And so I can give you a complete... So my father was a communist.
Wow.
He changed his views and became a banker. But when he was young, he was a communist, in fact, a Maoist.
Wow, good on him.
But by the time I was born, he had mellowed out. But what he was really interested in was Bertrand Russell, Chomsky to some extent, but because he was a hardcore communist, it was more like...
You're lucky.
Yeah, and so I got introduced to, I sort of read up on Marx before, and I remember having a discussion with my father saying it's actually really bizarre now that I think about it. I was 14 years old, and I just read about Marx and Weber as a comparison thing. And I remember telling my father, I was like, I think Marx is kind of stupid. Weber is the one who knows. Of course, there's a middle class. Marx is just making it like a binary. And then he told me okay, my library, that entire section is Marx. You have to start reading it. And so then, so I was actually one of those people where I was almost, even the religious aspect of things. People ask me you come from a Muslim country. How come you're an atheist? Well, my father kind of was a communist. So
you were lucky having such an interesting
intellectual
background. That's unusual. But that's good because you were introduced to interesting ideas.
Yeah, I was introduced. I would admit that I have changed a lot of my views since then. But that's the sort of upbringing or context that I came from.
Yeah, but see, you two didn't come from a dogmatic, ideological, background where you're kind of biased into some dogmas, doctrines, and it's very hard to extricate yourself from those.
Yeah, true.
I mean, I'm watching people like that Jewish friend of mine. I can't understand how they can maintain certain beliefs that seem so obviously wrong.
I have to go in a sec, but you guys can continue if you want.
Look, thank you. I know we might have to wind this conversation down. We're over.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I know.
Do you want to continue?
But can we? Yeah.
Why don't you guys continue? Would it be rude of me to go because there's someone downstairs and the Uber's going to bash me if I don't go?
I'll forgive you.
If you're okay with that,
One
I
more
would
segment.
like to continue.
Do you mind if I go?
I love this. I'm happy to sit here.
I want you to continue. He'll
good.
beat me up.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm good.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam, brother.
Lovely to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
I'm sorry. I did
Take
the
it.
best.
Go.
I have to go, but enjoy.
I don't know if that's where it's coming from. I think it is a symptom of the political world that we're living in, but I believe that's what some politician parents believe.
Well, look, I don't think banning, social media from kids is going to solve that problem anyway. We're talking about role models that are not good ones. Parents and schools have a responsibility to. That's what education's all about. I don't know if I had kids of that age. I've got grandchildren. I don't know. I'm interested what my kids think about how to handle their kids.
I don't know your kids obviously, but generally speaking, parents at that age who have little kids, they have one bizarre concern about this, which is that somehow our kids are going to become like illiterate when it comes to technology. It's like, no, it's all around them. They're never going to become illiterate.
It's not going to happen.
But usually they're happy about this because they see the effects of social media on their children, and they believe, maybe incorrectly so, that this might rectify that.
Well, that's an empirical question. I mean, the facts are relevant. I can't guarantee that the facts are that way, but
true. And your first point is the most is most important, which is that it's very easy to circumvent this. So none of this actually matters.
Got to be relevant.
So, yeah. Thank you, Peter, if I may call you Peter.
You better.
Because in our culture, I should actually call you sir.
Yeah, right.
There's a certain amount of respect that you're supposed to give your teachers.
In what culture?
In Pakistan,
Sure.
or even I would believe it's a very Oriental thing.
Yeah, no. Look, one of the interesting things is when I was in America, I had a lot of American students over the years here, study abroad students, sometimes half the class. In Australia, the students all call their teacher by their first name. All my students would call me Peter. The American students couldn't do it.
Yeah.
They couldn't get used to the idea of using the first name for their teachers. It was an American thing that you showed. But look, there's no less respect. It's a fake.
No, I know. I completely understand. And of course, someone like you, I completely understand why for you it does not matter at all. It's so completely irrelevant.
No, there are some cultures where they play up this gesture.
Yeah.
But no, it really doesn't matter.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on this
my privilege.
podcast.
Thank you.
We learned a lot from you. And those of you listening in, make sure that you follow Dr. Slezak. There's plenty of material that's been published already. You've got a few books that you've co-authored as well.
Well, I've got one book that my main research book, which I've just had published not long ago, called Spectator in the Cartesian Theatre. So if someone's interested in philosophy, they can look at that, the philosophy of mind and what's wrong with the philosophy of mind. The subtitle is Where Theories of the Mind Went Wrong Since Descartes.
Wow.
So that's...
What about you give another suggestion to people where they can get into philosophy before they go onto your book, something that introduces them to philosophy?
My book's not exactly accessible to the average reader. I'm trying to write a popular book about that. Look, there are lots of good sources for access to philosophy, popular books. I can't think of one offhand.
Have you read A Story of Philosophy by Will Durant?
Oh, did I read that? That was my first philosophy book.
Oh, that was your first philosophy
Before
book?
I did philosophy, when I was a teenager, that's an old book. I still got it on my shelf.
Yeah.
That's an old-fashioned book from many years ago. There's been a lot of popular books since then. They vary, but that was a serious introduction to philosophy. There's even Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, which is quite accessible.
And Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian was one of my...
those essays, all of his essays are still wonderful. They're not technical. They're very... I was very inspired by Russell. That's what led me to Chomsky. When I was 16, I first read Russell's book. It's called Science and Religion, or Religion and Science. Little book. home university library. I still remember. I was 16 and I read that and it opened my eyes. Bertrand Russell's a very important. It's not an accident that Chomsky has on his on his wall a picture of Bertrand Russell. Yeah. Chomsky doesn't believe in hero worship, but he's got a picture of Russell, and for all sorts of reasons.
Well, who would be, if you had a Mount Rushmore of your favorite heroes? Who are the 4 people on your Mount Rushmore?
Russell and Chomsky.
Russell and Chomsky. Okay, that's 2. Those are 2.
I have to have 4.
You have to have 4. 2 more.
Oh, I don't know. Galileo. And Socrates.
Socrates. Okay. I hope we get to have another conversation. We would love to have you back because I want to actually get your opinion on the Plato versus Aristotle debates.
Whoa, that's so heavy.
I know it's heavy, but I think not all of you guys, I know a lot of you might not be into it, but some of you would be.
We'll make them into it. We'll convince them.
Yeah.
But, I have a lot to say about Socrates and about Galileo. I wrote a kind of a theatre production, a play, based on actually using the text of Plato's Socratic dialogues. Mm-hmm. You cut out all of the waffle, the bullshit. It's a very dramatic story, but it's political. You know what I like to say? Socrates was the Chomsky of Athens.
Wow.
That's why I'm interested in it.
Have you ever considered writing a screenplay for it? Or
I have. Well, I've got a screenplay that I think ought to be. I've got a couple. One on Galileo and one on, which I'm currently half seriously working on, is on the Balfour period. But Galileo is also an important story as a dissident intellectual against authority. The main story of Galileo is dissenting against official authority. These are good stories that are, that's why I taught a course really about Galileo.
Yeah.
Those episodes are very important in the history of the West.
I suppose you would be somewhat of an equivalent of Galileo in today's time. You suffered a lot because of your academic pursuits.
That's terrible. That's
you're not dead,
comparison.
Which is great.
No, but you don't compare me to people of that stature. Okay. No, I'm just a regular teacher who admires, I think, the people that need to be paid attention to. Galileo is an inspiring figure for all sorts of reasons, both political and of course scientific.
Well, I hope you come back on this podcast and we can discuss all of that. Thank you so much for appearing on the pod. Thank you everyone for watching this. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.